In the autumn of 328 BC, in a banquet hall in Samarkand, Alexander the Great grabbed a spear from a guard and ran it straight through the chest of the man who had saved his life. The dying man was Cleitus the Black, his cavalry commander, the officer who at the Granicus river 4 years earlier had sliced off the arm of a Persian noble about to bring an axe down on Alexander's skull. Cleitus did not die in battle. He died at dinner, over an argument about whose father was the greater man. How does a commander who could read the mind of Darius across a battlefield fail to read his own rising pulse across the table? That is the question Arrian and Plutarch leave you with, and it is the question Stoicism was, in a sense, built to answer. Here is the night, as the ancient sources tell it. Alexander is in Marikanda, modern Samarkand, deep in his Bactrian campaign. The Macedonians have been fighting and marching for years. The king has begun adopting Persian dress, Persian court ritual, the bow called proskynesis. The old guard hates it. At the feast, the wine is unmixed, which by Greek standards means the men are not sipping, they are drowning. Flatterers around Alexander start comparing him to the gods, saying his deeds outshine those of Castor and Pollux, even Heracles. Cleitus, older, blunt, a veteran of Philip's wars, has had enough. He stands up and reminds Alexander that his victories were won with Macedonian blood. He throws Philip in his son's face. He says, according to Plutarch, that the hand which saved Alexander at the Granicus was this very hand. Alexander snaps. He looks for a weapon. His friends hold him back. Ptolemy hustles Cleitus out of the hall, and here is the moment where a Stoic would tell you the whole tragedy could still have ended. The space between impulse and action was open. Alexander only had to wait. He did not wait. Cleitus, equally drunk, comes storming back through another door, quoting Euripides at the king. Alexander seizes a spear from a sentry and runs him through. Cleitus collapses. The hall goes silent. Then comes the second collapse. Alexander pulls the spear out, tries to drive it into his own throat, is restrained, and spends the next 3 days in his tent refusing food and water, calling himself the murderer of his friends. Callisthenes and the philosopher Anaxarchus are eventually sent in to talk him back to life. That is the episode. Now here's why the Stoics, 3 centuries later, kept returning to it. Seneca writes an entire book called On Anger, 3 books actually addressed to his brother Novatus, and Alexander is his recurring case study. Seneca's verdict is brutal. A man who conquered the known world, he writes, was conquered by his own rage and his own grief. The empire was vast, the interior province was lost. For the Stoics, anger was not a feeling, it was a decision. Chrysippus, the early head of the Stoa, taught that a passion is an assent, a yes that the mind gives to a first impression. The flush, the tightening, the heat, those happen to everyone. Epictetus calls them the first movements. They are not yet anger. Anger is what happens when you sign the contract, the body slides across the table. And if this is starting to reshape how you think about your own temper, subscribe, because the rest of this channel is built on exactly this kind of operating system. What Alexander did at Samarkand was sign that contract in under a second. What Marcus Aurelius trained himself to do 2.5 centuries later was leave it unsigned, open the Meditations. Book 2, written on campaign on the Danube, begins with the line, "When you wake in the morning, tell yourself, today I shall meet with the meddling, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, the unsocial." He is not being cynical, he is preloading, he is making sure that when the first provocation hits, it does not surprise him into reaction. Surprise is what kills you. Surprise is what killed Cleitus. Marcus writes elsewhere, in Book 11, that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. In Book 9, he reminds himself that men exist for the sake of one another, so teach them or bear with them. Compare that posture to Alexander at the banquet, where every word from Cleitus felt like a personal wound that demanded blood. Now consider Cato the Younger, the senator who became, for Seneca, the very model of a Stoic in power. Plutarch tells us Cato trained himself in discomfort deliberately. He walked bareheaded in the sun and the rain. He wore unfashionable clothing on purpose to teach himself indifference to opinion. When he lost the praetorship, he went home and played ball. When civil war came and Caesar's victory was total, Cato at Utica in 46 BC read Plato's Phaedo twice, the dialogue on the immortality of the soul, then ended his own life rather than accept Caesar's pardon. You can argue with the choice, you cannot argue that the man was governed by a sudden gust, and Caesar himself, Cato's great opponent, understood this in his own way. Suetonius records that Caesar, when furious, would recite the Greek alphabet to himself before responding. Whether or not the detail is precisely true, the principle is the one the Stoics codified. Insert a delay. Buy time between the impression and the assent. That is the rule. That is the operating system. Between what happens to you and what you do about it, there is a gap. And the gap is where you live. Epictetus, the freed slave who taught emperors in waiting, puts it like this in the Discourses: "It is not things that disturb men, but their judgments about things." The Greek word he uses is dogmata, your settled opinions. Cleitus did not kill Alexander. Alexander's judgment about Cleitus killed Cleitus. Now apply this to you. When your boss undercuts you in a meeting, when a family member drags up a fight from 6 years ago, when a stranger leans on the horn, what arrives first is the first movement, the heat, the narrowing. That is not yet anger. You are still innocent. The question is what you do in the next 3 seconds. Seneca's advice on anger is almost laughably practical. Delay. He writes that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Wait until the first heat passes. He recommends looking in a mirror when enraged because no one, he says, has ever seen their own face in fury and not been ashamed of it. Marcus offers another tool. In Book 5 of the Meditations, he asks, does what's happened keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, straightforwardness? Run that checklist when the heat rises. Cleitus's insult did not keep Alexander from any of those things. Alexander's response to the insult destroyed every one of them in a single thrust. There is one more piece of this you should not miss. The Stoics insist that the man who cannot rule himself cannot truly rule anything else. Alexander commanded 100,000 soldiers, took Tyre, broke Persia, reached the Hyphasis, and in his tent in Samarkand he could not command one man himself for 90 seconds. Plutarch ends his account of the killing with the image of the king sobbing, calling Cleitus by name, refusing the food his friends brought him. The conqueror of Asia, undone by a dinner. This is why when the Stoics talked about power, they talked first about the inner citadel. Marcus uses that phrase, the inner acropolis, the part of you nothing external can storm unless you open the gate. Alexander opened the gate that night and never fully closed it again. Within 5 years he would be dead at Babylon, age 32. His empire fracturing before his body was cold. So what is the lesson you take home from a banquet in Samarkand in 328 BC? It is not that anger is shameful. The Stoics knew anger arrives. It is that anger is information, and the response to that information is yours to author. The first movement is weather. The action is character. Train the gap. Preload the morning the way Marcus did. Insert the delay the way Seneca prescribed. Run the checklist. Look in the mirror, because the spear in Alexander's hand was never the real weapon. The real weapon was the second between hearing Cleitus's words and deciding what they meant. He lost that second. You do not have to. The empire you actually rule is the one between your ears. Guard it like Marcus on the Danube, not like Alexander in Samarkand. If this gave you something worth keeping, hit like and subscribe, and we'll keep building this operating system one ancient mind at a time.